But tonight, we focus on yet another ugly piece of history that seems to be repeating itself once again. And it came to my attention last week when I watched this clip of Al Gore, which we will play here a little later on in the program. It's shocking, but only if you know history. And so that's what we're going to do. Tonight we'll focus on one unfortunate common thread shared throughout human history, and it is hate. And the attempt that hate eventually makes to wipe out massive sects of human population based on various forms of hate. Fear, ignorance, whatever it is. We have such a long history, and when I say we, I don't mean you and me per se. I don't mean the United States of America. I mean humans. And that's what it seems we forget over and over and over again, that it's humans that have a hate problem. This, for instance, this is a document of real hate. This is the document of the court proceedings, if you can call it that, of the Inquisition. This was for a man who would not submit and would not declare that he was on the church's side, or the king's side, if you will. He eventually did, after they made this case against him, he immediately then did submit, and this guy was lucky enough to live. But that's the Inquisition. The Inquisition where if you were deemed a heretic, you would be burned to death or you would be tortured. And that's just one episode. The punishments were, quote, for the public good in order that others may be terrified and weaned away from the evils that they might commit. It's interesting to me that the church and state, when combined, would burn people to death for not paying attention to God. And then later, the church and government would burn people to death for wanting to pay attention to God. The government doesn't matter. See, it's not the same hatred over and over again. It's whatever gives people power. These people, this is actually an original William Tyndale Bible, and all he wanted to do was be able to read it in his own native tongue. And so the church and state burned him to death because it took away their power. They burned people to death in the Inquisition because if you didn't submit to them, it would take away their power. The same thing with the people with the KKK. It took away their power. This is just such a spooky thing, even on a stupid mannequin. This is actually a woman's KKK outfit from the 1920s. Originally owned by, I don't know, some famous KKK woman. I don't know. I didn't know any famous ones existed, but it's extremely disturbing because it was owned by a woman. When the women of a society go awry, you're in deep, deep trouble. The KKK thought that they were superior, but it really wasn't superior as much as it was about power. And they tried to wipe those out that they believed were inferior. But where did that come from? That idea of superiority had to be carefully taught. Before the violence of the KKK, because the KKK happened after the Civil War, there came this. And this is a dog tag. This was a tag that had to be worn. This was number 1041 from Charleston. And this is a dog tag that had to be worn by a slave. And they were not to be caught without it around their neck, like a dog. How do you get to the KKK, where you really believe you're superior? We'll make people into dogs first. But before people were made into dogs, and it was only one race, it was raged on really anybody, not just race. It was anyone poor, regardless of their color. In fact, many of the slaves in the early American colonies were white. They were called indentured servants because you'd be expected to be free after you served your time. And that went for both blacks and whites. And between 1630 and 1670, while they were burning people at the stake for this, here in America, slavery of both black and white was commonplace. And freed whites and freed Africans, as they were known then, would contract their own slaves, both black and white. When African Anthony Johnson was freed in 1635, he received 250 acres of land, and he became the master of both black and white slaves or indentured servants. He's actually most famous for being the first owner, if you will, of a state-recognized African-American slave. There were no cameras back then, but do we have the picture? Have we already showed it to you? The picture of the owner, there he is. He's an African-American himself. You see, the idea is that hate knows no bounds, but it's always about power and control. All you have to do is believe that you are superior, some way or another, race, intelligence. Progressive history teaches us that our founders hated the Indians because they were all racist and they kicked the Indians off their land and stole it. Yet countless Native Americans fought alongside Washington during the Revolutionary War. The real hatred of the Native Americans didn't come until much, much later. It didn't come until Andrew Jackson really started to make it just very popular. He decided that the Indians were evil, and he implemented the Indian removal policy, which amounted nothing less than an ethnic cleansing of the Native American. This is a book called A Century of Dishonor that came out. It's a very rare copy because no one wanted to read it. No American wanted to see it, but I'm preserving it so it lasts. What happened? What happened to the people who wouldn't become Christians? What happened to the Christians who wouldn't sit down? What happened to the Native Americans that weren't good enough? What happened to the slaves? You see, Abraham Lincoln, when he wanted to free the slaves, he didn't argue that a man would be, that a man who was black was superior. What he did was he argued that you have no right. This is his thesis. He says it's not about black and white. It can really be about anything. He said, if A can prove that he may have the right to enslave B, why may not B snatch the same argument and prove equally that he may enslave A? This is his letter in his own handwriting. But the next paragraph goes on, but you mean that it's not color exactly? You mean that whites are intellectually superior to blacks? Then why can't someone who is intellectually superior to you enslave you? You see, the argument falls apart, and Abe Lincoln knew it. In the 1800s, we have Darwin. And after we freed the slaves, Darwin came about, and he took hatred into a whole new theory. He was only part of it. Darwin's theory of evolution was gaining popularity, and he warned of the consequences of failing to selectively breed. He said, and I quote, if the various checks do not prevent the reckless, the vicious, and otherwise inferior members of society from increasing at a quicker rate than a better class of men, the nation will retrograde. As has occurred too often in the history of the world, we must remember that progress is no invariable rule. So in other words, you're not guaranteed to move forward. Well, now we're breeding people like dogs. And Darwin's theories influenced many, including a guy over in Germany named Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche's most famous for declaring the death of God and believing the world had to be freed from the evils of Judeo-Christian morality. But that would beg the question, of course, if it's not God's morality, then whose morality do we replace it with? He answered, quote, society, as a great trustee of life, is responsible to life itself for every miscarried life. It also has to pay for such lives. Consequently, it ought to prevent them. In numerous cases, society ought to prevent procreation. To this end, It may hold readiness without any regard to descent or rank or spirit. He was saying here that you could restrain people in any way, even deprive them of their freedom in certain circumstances, even castrate them. Well, you take Darwin, you have to help the species along, otherwise we'll go awry. And then Nietzsche, there is no God, and we have to, even if we take them and deprive them of their liberty and freedom, we have to do that because there is no God. This was the trouble that brewed in the 20th century, and it eventually led to the promotion of something called eugenics, Greek meaning good birth. And from 1912 to 1932, 3 international eugenic congresses took place. This is an original copy of a book called Eugenics. It's absolutely horrifying. The purpose of eugenics and these congresses was to investigate how they could improve the human genetic makeup. Which country do you suppose was the first to undertake action? Of course, it's the Progressive Era. Under Progressive President Teddy Roosevelt, he created the National Hereditary Commission, whose mission was to encourage the increase of families of good blood and discourage the vicious elements of the crossbred civilization. Oh. Sterilization laws cropped up. In fact, the first one was passed in Indiana in 1907, where you could just grab a woman or a girl and sterilize her. It's horrible, right? You wouldn't want just girls sterilized, right? Remember that for later in the show. Others followed. The betterment of the race. In Yale, they had a race to get to a better race, if you will. And the whole thing was to get other Americans from their homes and pull them out, deprive them of the ability to have children if they were, stupid or deemed wasteful people, and lock them away in institutions. These actions were likely emboldened because the academic elite were behind the idea. And so they just knew better, right? The greatest minds in America, Yale, arguing that our national vitality depended on a productive citizen. And the best way to ensure that, of course, was through carefully controlled breeding. Well, you can't pick who should marry who and who should have children with whom. You just had to weed out those who shouldn't be breeding with anyone. Yale luminaries founded the Race Betterment Society, among other eugenics propaganda outlets, and eugenics became mainstream in the scientific community. It was a big deal. I want to show you a bulletin board at Yale that should scare the dickens out of you. This is from Yale in the early 20th century. It says here, these three little circles there, I don't know if you can make them out, are light bulbs. The first light bulb says this light flashes every 16 seconds. Every 16 seconds a person is born in the United States. This light flashes every 7.5 minutes. Every 7.5 minutes a high-grade person is born in the United States and will have the ability to do creative work to be fit for leadership. Only about 4% of all Americans come within this class. Then the top one says this light flashes every 15 seconds. Every 15 seconds, $100 of your money goes for the care of persons with bad heredity, such as insane, the feeble-minded, criminals, and other defectives. Some people are born to be a burden on the rest. Important to remember the Yale Bulletin Board. This takes us to Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. She lamented the spread of human weeds, the undesirables, as she, according to Singer, said African Americans were. The full context of the human weeds quote should be seen. She said, Margaret Sanger, quote, colored people are like human weeds and are to be exterminated. The Sanger wanted to engineer people, and she engineered the Negro Project. She said of it, quote, We do not want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious neighbors. She was talking about the African American minister that would play right into their hands, she felt. It should come as no surprise that Margaret Sanger supported the KKK. Yes, maybe she was one of the progressives that wore that outfit behind me. Always, to me, any aroused group was a good group, and therefore I accepted an invitation to talk to the women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan. That's Margaret Sanger saying that. She said the door dims, and the figures parading around with banners illuminated with crosses. She said, but through the end, simple illustrations. I believe I had accomplished my purpose. Dozen so invitations to speak to similar groups were proffered. Isn't that great? Considering it was the intellectual and scientific community and the United States government striving to be at the forefront of eugenics movement, it also should come as no surprise that Nazi Germany, who you may want to recall now, got rid of the world's Jews, or tried to, as part of Hitler's quest to achieve the perfect race, learned everything that the Germans knew from us. Quote, I have studied with great interest the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction. By the way, several American states. All probability they would be of no value or injurious to the racial stock. Here's a brag letter from Germany, from Adolf Hitler, saying, I just want you to know, I learned this from the United States. Let me show you another brag letter. This one from the leading U.S. eugenics group. I believe they were in California, called the Human Betterment Foundation. They said, you'll be interested to know that your work has played a powerful part in shaping the opinions of a group of intellectuals who are behind Hitler in this epic-making program. Everywhere I sense that their opinions have been tremendously stimulated by American thought, and particularly by the work of the Human Betterment Foundation. I want you, my dear friend, to carry this thought with you for the rest of your life, that you really have jolted into action a great government of 60 million people. I wonder if those in California, the progressive movement, did carry that with them for the rest of their life. This Betterment Foundation, along with other eugenics groups, operated in a close-knit network, publishing racist eugenic newsletters and pseudo-scientific journals such as Eugenical News and Eugenics. And they also helped with the propaganda for the Nazis. You see, they were proud that their idea was finally being implemented. So when somebody says, like Hillary Clinton, I'm a proud early 20th century progressive, like Hillary Clinton said in the early days of her election campaign, this is who she's talking about, and you should know that.